Before we jump into this podcast, let's just have a first word from our sponsors, NordVPN, the fastest VPN in the world and an absolute essential travelling companion. You can use NordVPN on 10 devices with just one account, easily switching your virtual location to access apps and websites in other countries. But if you're out of the country, make sure that you've got NordVPN to be able to use your subscriptions and watch the live sport that you might miss. If you're at home, use it to see if you can save money with products that might be cheaper in another region. Go to nordvpn.com/Manchester to get 4 extra months on the 2-year plan. The link is also in the podcast description.
Hello and welcome to the Manchester is Red podcast by the Manchester Evening News. I'm Jack Flintham and I'm joined today by Steven Railston. Steve, how are we?
Not bad, Jack, thank you. A good weekend, an enjoyable trip down to London. It was a 5:30 alarm, but I got back on the 4:30 train back, which I was quite pleased with. Obviously, you can rush back to the train station sometimes after matches, but I filed my report, my player ratings, obviously went to the press conference, filed 2 lengths from that and rushed back to the station. And I was back to Manchester for, I think it was around 7:30. So got back, watched the darts, and I'll be honest with you though, I had another early night. I was pretty tired by the time it got to 11 o'clock. It was a decent day.
Yeah, it definitely felt a much longer day, especially in that first half. It felt like, oh God, it feels like it's like 4 o'clock.
Coffee's the key to the early start on those days.
Yes, definitely. Gets you through it, doesn't it? So United enter the November international break unbeaten. It was a bit like deja vu, wasn't it, Steve, from the week previous, though, and the trip to Forest?
Yeah, very similar in a lot of ways. Obviously, United took the lead again in the first half, made a disappointing start to the second half. The only difference was obviously last weekend before Tottenham, Forest scored twice at the beginning of the half, and Tottenham huffed and puffed, and they put United under a lot of pressure when play resumed after the interval, but they couldn't find the goal. It seemed like United had weathered the storm at that point, and they might come away with the 3 points and see out the match. But Tottenham's pressure told in the end, obviously scoring twice. But again, just like against Tottenham Forest, you're very disappointed if you're a fan and you've travelled down to that game to see them chuck away the game in claps. But then to salvage a point and ensure the points are shared with a late goal was obviously pleasing. Fair play to Matthijs de Ligt. He's having a really good season. He was involved in the Tottenham equaliser. He was turned by Matthijs Tell, but he went up the other side of the pitch and scored a really good header at the back post. So I'm really pleased with that. But what will be concerning is this tendency in the last few weeks to start the second half slowly. They really need to stamp that out if they want to improve going forward, and that'll be the key to securing Champions League qualification, which of course has to be the aim for this season. They have to find a way to secure that second goal, because it's fantastic opening the scoring, but if you don't kill off the opponent with a second goal, then you're always going to give them a chance to come back into the game. And that's obviously what Tottenham did. They've got quality. We talked about kind of how they had been struggling to create chances, but Thomas Frank made, I think it was 3 changes at one point in the second half. Tottenham fans actually booed the changes, but they worked, and that's how they found a way back into the match.
Yeah, definitely. And just on that second half, it felt with Forest, it was a lot easier to point it out. Like they were still in the dressing room, United starting that second half, and Forest got 2 quick goals. It could have been easily been the same case if not for Larman's making a couple of very decent stops. But yeah, as you mentioned, same again. United ended up conceding twice, don't they? And it's bailed out at the end.
Yeah, fair play to Senna Lobbins. He's made a tremendous impact, and he made 2 very good saves at the start of that second half. One to stop Romero from close range. He probably should have saved it, but a good save nonetheless. And the second save to stop Paulinho was actually better for me, because he saw that late and still made the stop. So a really good contribution. He looked really uncharacteristically a bit nervous or not switched off, not switched on at the start of the game. Obviously, De Ligt had made that back pass, and Lomans very kind of casually went to go take a touch of the ball and conceded the corner. Thankfully, that was cleared, but that would have focused his mind, because Tottenham fans jeered him at that point. They were obviously singing Champions of Europe at the start of the game. We know what we are, but they quickly quietened down after Mbeumo's goal. Mbeumo's having a great season. That's obviously his 6th goal. And at the moment, he just kind of feels unstoppable. When you get the ball into him, you know he's probably going to make something happen, or he's going to score himself. He's hit the ground running. He's been so enjoyable to watch. And it was actually interesting because the header that he scored, he wasn't actually marked. It was actually quite a simple header. I actually thought he placed it into the top left corner at the time, but watching it back, it was almost just almost glanced into the left. He didn't have much to do, really. It was a simple header. Ahmad did well to find him with the cross. But United, again, as I say, will be disappointed not to have won the game from that point, because if you 1-0 up, just like they were against Nottingham Forest on the road, you'd like to think you could manage the game better and see out the result.
Yeah, just looking at those Spurs goals, obviously it was a mad last 10 minutes to the game, all in. What would you say, if anything, if anyone's to blame? I can't really pinpoint any blame on the goalkeeper for either, but do you see anyone in the defence that largely had quite a solid game at fault for those?
Well, the changes changed the game. With 18-20 minutes to go, Ruben Amorim made a triple change. Lenny Yoro, Manuel Ugarte and Mason Mount came on. Harry Maguire, Casemiro and Matthias Cunha came off. I think I would have kept Maguire on personally. I understood the Mount substitution because Cunha probably had an off day, wasn't at his best. And the Casemiro change really had a huge impact. I think it was reported that he actually received a bit of a knock, so he requested to come off, which is why that change was made. Emmanuel Ugarte is having a really bad season. I think he was at fault for the equalising goal. If you watch it back, I can't remember the Tottenham player. I thought it was Papisart at the time, but it was Odegaard, wasn't it, who picked up the ball?
Is this for the second Richarlison's goal?
No, for the equaliser, yeah. Okay. For Tell. Yeah. So Wilson Odegaard picks up the ball in midfield. Ugarte is there a yard ahead of him, and instead of bringing him down, which could have been a tactical foul, instead of making a block or getting his body in front of him, he just breezes by him. It wasn't good enough from Ugarte. It was far too weak. Then obviously the ball's played in. They scored the goal. De Ligt was turned by Tell. I actually think I thought would be pointed at De Ligt straight away, but I thought Ugarte was way more at fault for that. And I think that sums it up really. When you look at when Casemiro comes off in games, United tend to struggle. They're way better when he's on the pitch, and that's got a lot to do with how Casemiro is playing. He's having a very good season, but also, as I said a few weeks ago, how poorly Ugarte is playing. Signed for 42 million, excluding add-ons in 2024. United pushed all summer to sign him from PSG. They were very happy with the deal that they got in the end on deadline day because they felt it reflected pretty good value for Ugarte. They felt it was a decent fee, but he's not looked worth it during his time at the club, unfortunately. His first season was mixed. There was some decent performances against weaker sides, but he seemed to take a while to kind of adapt to the speed of the Premier League. And I will sympathise with him a bit because obviously when you're coming on from the bench, it is difficult, especially in high-octane games when the stakes are high and perhaps there's 15 minutes to go and the opposition are really pushing to get a goal. But he's got to do better. He's a £42 million signing. He's an experienced player. He's an international with Uruguay. He was really disappointing for me in the build-up to that goal. So I think some people have actually pointed at him for the second goal as well for Richarlison's, but Ugarte makes the header to clear the ball. He's slightly pushed and he's playing Richarlison onside, but I wouldn't blame him for that because he is slightly pushed, as I say, and he made the header. But yeah, he should have done a lot better for the first, undoubtedly, I think.
Yeah, and I suppose you mentioned him just briefly there, but Matthijs de Ligt obviously went from zero to hero in the space of 5 minutes. I did find it a little bit unlucky. I mean, on another day, that deflection, it goes out for a corner and it's a great block. It just so happened that it spiraled away from Larman's. But to pop up at the back stick, pretty free header, actually. I thought it maybe not the best defending from Spurs at the death, but it kind of sums up the sort of season he's having, isn't it?
Yeah, in many ways, kind of the season de Ligt having and the spirit that he's showing embodies kind of the improvement that we're seeing in United. We talked about it at Nottingham Forest. They wouldn't have got a result They wouldn't have drawn that game last season if it had been played. Very similar in this match. De Ligt has shown an attitude that he never gives up. He's fighting to the end, and that's what the team are doing this season. We didn't see that a lot last year, and that contributed to a lot of problems. So reassuring that even when they've suffered a setback and they've gone 2-1 behind, they've found the carrot and the courage to go back up the other side of the pitch and get a point. Obviously, some great scenes down on the touchline. Ruben Amorim's staff were on their feet. I think Amorim himself stayed very calm and composed. But yeah, fair play to De Ligt. He was obviously turned by Tell, as I say, for the goal, but it was a very slick turn. That can happen when you get, especially at that moment of the game. And it was interesting listening to De Ligt's interview with MUTV today, because he was asked kind of what went wrong in his opinion. And he said that the kind of energy levels dropped in the second half and he felt United were a bit tired. And although they are only playing one game per week, their performances have been quite intense and they've been working very hard in some of the matches during that very good run in October, during those 3 wins on the bounce. But you could probably feel it against Nottingham Forest and you could feel it against Tottenham that in the second half of the game, the energy levels weren't quite there. They weren't at their best. So perhaps the international break's probably coming in at the right time. Obviously, De Ligt's being called up to the Netherlands squad. That's thoroughly deserved because, I mean, I banged the drum probably around a month and a half ago now, maybe even after Brentford or after the City game about De Ligt, because I think he'd gone under the radar at the start of the season, but his form definitely isn't going under the radar now, and he deserves the plaudits. And again, a really big moment at the end of the game there with that header.
Definitely. And one concerning thing, again, it's 2 goals conceded. You look at the Premier League table, United have conceded 18, haven't they, this season? It's a bit of a concern, this, isn't it? The defensive record, albeit the defence seems quite set, goals still keep being leaked.
Yeah, it's quirky, isn't it? Because if you look at the squad and you're asked which department has the most strength and depth, you definitely say the defence is the strongest area. And I discussed that on the last podcast. You walk through the players they've got there compared to midfield or the number 10. Obviously, number 10 roles with some quality there, but you take out Mbeumo and Kuna. I suppose you put Mountain as well. There's not too much there, but there is strong defensive options. Ruben Amorim has very good players at the back, but they are struggling. They are conceding goals. As you've just said, 18 goals in the Premier League this season. If you look at the Premier League table, Arsenal have conceded 5, which, fair play, that's excellent. Manchester City have conceded 8. Chelsea have conceded 11. And Sunderland, Tottenham and Aston Villa have all conceded 10 each. So those are the 5 teams above United in the table. If they want to qualify for Champions League football, they must improve that defensive record. And that's going to be the next indicator of progress. We have seen progress in the last month and a half. It's been excellent to see. Ruben Amorim was rightly rewarded with the Premier League Manager of the Month award. And Mbeumo won Player of the Month for October. So some really good results in October, but they could have started November a lot better if they had a better defensive record. And look, we've talked about Lommans and how good he is because he's made some brilliant saves. And he obviously made 2 very good saves at the start of that game. But is it 7 goals, I think, in his last 5 games since he came into the team? Yeah. So that's 2 more than Arsenal have conceded throughout the whole season. And no one's going to turn around and say that Lommans is at fault for those because he's made some wonderful saves during that period. It would have been more without him. So that just shows you as a team, as a collective unit, United aren't doing good enough. And I think the concentration, it sounds like such a simple thing to say, but the players need to take responsibility. The concentration levels, I believe, are lacking at times. And you saw it against Brighton and Patrick Dorgu made a mistake, which led to Danny Welbeck's goal. Joshua Zirkzee then lost his marker from a corner. So there's 2 goals there from 2 individual mistakes. It was then Nottingham Forest next. Diego Dalot should have been tighter for Morgan Gibbs-White's header. Obviously, you can talk about Ahmad going up against Gibbs-White, but that's just part of the system. Ahmad playing a right wing back. And then for the second goal against Nottingham Forest, we discussed it. Lenny Yoro, Matthijs de Ligt, Casemiro. There was a bit of a mix-up there in the box. No one really knew who was going for the ball. Then the second ball broke and Nottingham Forest tucked it away. And then again, as I discussed just before, Manu Ugarte, I thought was hugely at fault with Wilson Odobey going past him. For me in that moment, just take him down. Just take the yellow card and take the free kick. You've got to be way more savvy there. And we've seen a few mistakes from Ugarte. We saw it against West Ham last season in the Premier League. When he went to the floor, he didn't get up quick enough. We saw it against Grimsby in the Carabao Cup second round. Similar thing happened. He went to the floor after collision with Ahmad. In my opinion, he didn't get up quick enough and sprint back. I'm not sure he's got the engine that we hoped he did. I'm not sure he's got the quality on the ball that we thought United were getting with Ugarte. So, look, I'm not going to pin it too much on Ugarte, but as I've just discussed, the individual mistakes need to be cut out. The players need to take responsibility, because as a collective, they are disappointing in that regard. They are conceding too many goals. And when you look at the top of the league, the teams who are setting the pace are conceding far fewer goals. Arsenal and City are obviously setting the pace, the examples in the Premier League at the moment, as they have been for a few years. So, yeah, very interesting. And that clearly is the area that Amram needs to improve and hopefully will improve in the next few weeks.
Yeah. And do you think it is just as simple as that, then, that they just need to cut down on these individual mistakes and that's going to fix it? Because as you mentioned there, it is so puzzling when you think you wouldn't necessarily think going into January or into the summer, oh, well, the defence needs to be targeted here. But then you look at the stats and the goals are being conceded. It's just a case of concentration for you, is it?
Yeah, I think that's a huge aspect. And I think as well, attack is a huge part of defence, isn't it? If you can get that second goal and maintain your level throughout the 90 minutes, because we saw a drop-off from United at the start of that second half, if they could sustain that performance level that they showed through a bit of the end of the first half, look, let's face it, they didn't start the game too well, but they got the goal. And if you could find that second goal, that changes the game. But the second you don't find, the second you can't extend your advantage, you're then inviting the opponent to come back into the game. And naturally, at home, they are going to create chances. De Ligt said that himself in his interview. There was balls going into the box, and at one point, one's going to probably make its way through. So individual mistakes and finding that second goal, I think, is key to solve it, really.
Definitely. Well, we'll take a short break there, and when we come back, we'll be discussing Benjamin Sesko. Right, welcome back to the Manchester is Red podcast. And as mentioned before, we're going to discuss about Benjamin Sesko now. He came off just before, I believe, was it just before Spurs' second? You could see on the TV replays, Amram looking over in hope that Sesko was maybe going to be able to return, because obviously they'd used all 5 substitutes. Sadly, he wasn't able to. That knee injury, bit of a concern, isn't it, for United?
Yeah, huge concern. Obviously, Ruben Amorim reverted to the striker list front three. I said that I thought there was potential for that to happen, but I presumed that Mason Mount would come in, because Mount started the opening 3 games of the season in that role. Then he started at Anfield and it worked, but Ruben Amorim went with Ahmad, Kunat and Burmo in those positions instead. Obviously, Sesko started on the bench, came on in the 58th minute, and then around half an hour later, so around 2 minutes remaining in the game, he obviously went off with the knee injury. I think the chance that led to the knee injury, I think Sesko will look back on and think he should have done a whole lot better, and that would have won the game for United, because as you said, it was 1-1 at that point. Tottenham had just got a goal. Mason Mount came on and actually made 2 chances for Sesko. The first chance, he needed too long on it. He kind of divered, and he's not going to get that time in the Premier League. He might have in the Bundesliga, but you don't get that in England. And then the second chance, which obviously we're discussing here, when he got the injury, Van der Ven is probably the only defender in the league that'll recover in that scenario, because he's just so fast and clever. He's really pacey, and he's got the ability to get back. But Sesko, again, wanted too much time on it. And I don't know why he didn't just hit it with his left foot. The ball comes across, hit it first time with your left, get a shot on target. It might go in, it might not, but at least you're going to test the goalkeeper and potentially win the game. You try to take another touch, you don't have that time, and Van der Ven came back and obviously recovered the ball. Then his knee looked to kind of jolt, didn't it, when he hit the turf, and a bit of an awkward land, and he came off and couldn't continue, which is a huge shame. We're hopefully going to have an update on Sesko today. By the time you listen to this podcast, an update will probably, hopefully, already being communicated. I asked the question this morning. He was spotted limping away from the stadium. He didn't seem to be using any crutches. He might have had a leg brace on, but he was wearing tracksuit bottoms, so you couldn't really tell. But Ruben Amorim was asked about the injury at his post-match press conference. He said he didn't know whether it was serious, but he was asked about potential plans for the January window with the Africa Cup of Nations in mind as well. And he'd mentioned that depending on the severity of Sesko's injury, there could be potential there to strengthen the attacking options in January, which was interesting. So it'll be a blow if Sesko is ruled out, and it's definitely not what he needed. There was some conversation in the week building up to the game because of Gary Neville's comment after the Nottingham Forest match. Gary Neville had obviously said that Sesko had looked miles off it compared to Kuna and Mbeumo, who have been Premier League proven and they came in and hit the ground running. The comment got a lot of backlash, and I think a lot of fans were very unhappy with Neville. But I think I asked Ruben Amorim about it at his press conference. Samuel as well had asked about Sesko's form, and Amorim's answer was interesting. He speaks very honestly, and he said, "Look, it's a fact that Sesko has struggled. He would have liked to score more goals." He described him as a control freak. He said he was relaxed about Sesko's form, but he said Sesko isn't. I can't remember if we touched upon this in the preview podcast. We probably did, didn't we? So it was interesting to hear Amorim talk about Sesko in those terms. I'm not sure I'd say he struggled. He's obviously only scored 2 goals, which isn't good enough for the money they paid. You'd like him to have a lot more than 2. If you're a striker for United, you have to be hitting or targeting 20 goals a season. That is the benchmark. If you're a striker at this club, they've had some obviously wonderful strikers down the years. But Sesko's 22 years old, and as I've said, we all agree that they needed a more experienced centre forward in the summer window. We wrote at the time, we talked about it, but they didn't. They've gone for Sesko, and as I've said, they have to just play the cards that they've been dealt now. I think he will come good in time, but he is going to need time. And I think when you look at Senna Lommans, that's what has made his kind of start at the club even more impressive, because when a player joins United or any club in the Premier League, they should be given time to adapt. They should be given at least a season. Lommans has made a remarkable impact at 23 years old. Sesko's going to need a little bit more time. He doesn't seem to be an instinctive finisher. Maybe that's the way to describe it. He wants too much time on the ball, and I think that's the key difference. He'll learn with more time in the Premier League that he needs to get that shot off half a second quicker, because the defender is likely going to be coming behind him. I'm not even sure he realised Van der Ven was coming behind him, if I'm honest, for that chance. But if he is ruled out, even though he isn't scoring as many as we would all like, it obviously will be a blow, because he's the only centre forward in that dressing room. Joshua Zirkzee is another option, but I think we'd all agree he can't lead the line. And then obviously you'd probably play for false 9, or you'd rotate. So you'd have Ahmad or Mason Mount playing there, and Kuna, and they'd be rotating positions. So it'd be a huge blow if he's out, yeah.
Yeah, and just I suppose hypothetically speaking, would you rather have Sesko or Rasmus Højlund? Obviously Højlund's at Napoli, and he's doing okay, nothing overly spectacular stuff at Napoli so far, but you'd still think that they've potentially had an upgrade this summer, bringing in Benjamin?
Yeah, should have signed Harry Kane.
Well, wouldn't we all?
2 summers too late, wasn't it? I mean, the other name was Ollie Watkins, and I actually thought it made more sense to sign Watkins at the time, because again, this Premier League proven approach, United needed goals. Watkins seemed more of a certainty in that sense, where there'd be a lot less risk attached. But Watkins is struggling for Aston Villa. I don't know how many goals he scored this season, but I don't think it's more than 3, because I've seen his fantasy football numbers and they're not very good. So yeah, Watkins is struggling. In terms of who I'd rather have between Højlund and Sesko, I'd have to go with Sesko. But Højlund, let's not forget, scored 16 goals in his first season. Sesko will be aiming for at least that, you'd think. Højlund had a good first season, he did. Considering coming into a country where he hadn't played, a young striker, very similar profile, obviously, to Sesko coming into the division. But the problem is with Højlund, that second year was just so bad that Ruben Amorim had seen enough and he decided to move him on. But as I said, we could sit here and compare, but I said this on the other podcast, that I would have just kept them both. I think if he had kept Højlund, he would have really benefited from playing as a backup striker. He would have been less pressure on his shoulders. He would have contributed off the bench. And then in scenarios like this, if Sesko had picked up an injury, then Højlund would be available to come in. And who knows? He was definitely better at Højlund than he showed last season. I've got no doubts about that. Obviously, some good goals after joining Napoli in the Champions League. I think against Sporting Lisbon when Kevin De Bruyne played him through. But I think the Italian press have not been impressed with his last few performances. But look, 2 young strikers. I think we're seeing from Sesko exactly what we expected. It was not going to be easy for him to come into the Premier League and really hit the ground running, because he just doesn't have that experience. He's quite raw. If you watched him in the Bundesliga, you could see that he had a good goal scoring record, but he didn't have an excellent goal scoring record. But as I say, I believe he'll come good in time. But United ideally needed a striker who could be performing now, and Sesko's going to need a little bit more patience and time. Definitely.
And you touched on AFCON earlier. One player who they're going to be without and who's really going to be a massive blow without is Bryan Mbeumo. Obviously scored the opener, potentially was a little quieter in the second half, but that kind of was a result of the whole United side, I feel, looking a bit slower in that second half. But once again, he looks like the main threat for United, and it's been another impressive game for him.
Yeah, it was another very good performance from Bryan Mbeumo, and notably, he was obviously starting on the left. It was relatively fluid, but Mbeumo spent the bulk of his minutes on the pitch on the left side. He started there, and he performed. So he was moved sides. I can't recall him ever playing on the left, to be honest. Playing for Brentford, he probably did on a few occasions, but he performed regardless. That is a sign of a great player. We've seen it with Bruno Fernandes over the years. Irrespective of which position he plays, he performs and produces. And Mbeumo did that on Saturday. 6 goals for the club, 1 assist in 12 appearances. He scored 20 Premier League goals last season. I think we all probably thought that he'd perhaps struggle to reproduce that haul just because it was so impressive. But at the moment, he's probably on course for it. He could definitely achieve it if he carries on to perform how he is, because he's performing so well. He's full of confidence. It's so refreshing to watch a player like this at United after signing for the club. As I've said multiple times, often a player will come in, they take backward steps, but Mbeumo has just really took to it like a duck to water. His celebration was funny, wasn't it? He almost gestured just like he did at Anfield to be like, "Oh, you're not entertained," with his hands out. And he's been doing the Homer Simpson dance, hasn't he, recently as well? But he's scoring that many goals. He's going to need a few more celebrations. He's going to have to vary his routine. United fans need a chant for Mbeumo, because there's not actually a chant yet for him. I think that's probably the next thing to come. He deserves one. He thoroughly deserves one. And he's actually becoming the dressing room's most important player, I think. That has been Bruno Fernandes for a long time. Ahmad threatened to become the dressing room's most important player last season before picking up an ankle injury in February. And obviously, Fernandes then ended the season very strongly and won the Player of the Season award. But Mbeumo is the favourite for that award so far. He's just been so good, hasn't he? So good.
Yeah, definitely. And one player who had a bit of an off day was Bruno Fernandes. Obviously, I say this despite him delivering the corner that led to the equaliser, which just goes to show how good a player he is for United. Even on one of his worst days, he still manages to come up with the goods. But yeah, a bit of an off one for him.
You're right, though, isn't it? That's what is funny with Fernandes, because you can have a real off day and he can be very poor for his very high standards, and yet he can make something happen. And he did at the end of the game. He played the corner into the box for De Ligt's equaliser to make it 2-2. But yeah, for his high standards, he had an off day. I don't think he was very physical in the midfield. I think some of his passing was loose. He struggled. And there's obviously been a conversation about him playing in the deeper role, but I think he showed over the last few weeks that maybe I was a bit stupid to say that he was struggling in that role, because he performed a little bit better. Although having said that, he definitely want to play further forward. As I said, he'd play anywhere. He's that kind of player, but his preference is for the number 10 role. But in the system at the moment, he's not going to play there. He's playing in midfield. But yeah, for Fernandes, for high standards, it wasn't a good day particularly, but fair play for producing that cross into the box at the end.
Yeah, definitely. And one player who didn't make the trip, obviously Lisandro Martinez wasn't risked, but Kobbie Mainoo was also absent. Quite interesting pre-match, wasn't it, from Ruben Amorim when he was speaking about the inclusion of youngster Jack Fletcher. It was quite interesting that the academy record is certainly on Amorim's mind, and he's not wanting to be in that position to break the 88-year streak, is he?
So obviously the Manchester Evening News, when United get the train down to games in London, we get the photos. So on the Friday night, we had published the squad. We'd published who was there. I did the story, and obviously Lisandro Martinez wasn't there, as you said, which wasn't a huge surprise because he's obviously being brought steadily along as he reaches the final stage of his recovery from a serious knee injury. But Kobbie Mainoo wasn't there, which meant someone had to come into the squad. And it was Jack Fletcher, or I thought it was. So obviously we get to explain a little bit, you see the photos, and I'm typing up the squad in the article. And I obviously cover a lot of academy games. I'd say I've got very, very good academy knowledge, and I could pick out the kids up to the under 18s and tell you who they are. But with Jack Fletcher and Tyler Fletcher, I get a little bit confused. There's something in my brain that doesn't really work with twins. That's going back years when I was in school. So I'm looking at Jack. I'm looking at Jack Fletcher. I'm looking at the photo, and I'm thinking that's definitely Jack Fletcher. But I wanted to double check, as all journalists should, and get confirmation. So I'd messaged someone at the club to get confirmation. But as a principal, they said they were unable to confirm because it would be kind of giving squad news, which I wasn't laughing at the time. I thought, oh, bloody hell. So I had to look at the photos. I got a photo of Jack Fletcher up and just basically stared at it for 10 minutes along with his profile on the club website to ensure that it was him. And look, Jack Fletcher, I think he was involved with 8 first-team squads last season. Tyler is doing very well in the academy, but he still hasn't made a first-team squad. These are obviously Darren Fletcher's kids, if you haven't heard of them. Both 18 years old now, signed from Manchester City 2 years ago, are doing very well. Jack's a more prominent player, plays in more advanced roles. Tyler's been playing defensive midfield and they're progressing nicely. But it was Jack who was in the squad. Thankfully, I got it right. It was Jack Fletcher. That's a little bit of insight on how I landed on that reporting. But yeah, you're right. It was huge for the academy record because when with Mainoo out the squad, then Tom Heaton was travelling down, but that didn't necessarily mean he'd be named on the bench. He obviously is considered as an academy graduate. But with Fletcher in the squad, that meant that record continued. That record, of course, is having an academy graduate in every squad or a homegrown player. Since 1937, it's gone on for 88 years. Saturday was the 4,333rd game that it's gone on for. So Ruben Amorim's aware of this history. He spoke about it at a press conference recently, and he admitted that he didn't want to be the manager who broke it. It's a really important record. I think the club has been built on promoting youth and giving young players opportunities. Some of the best teams in the club's history have been underpinned by homegrown talent. It's important that continues. Having said that, you can't just do it as tokenism. These players need to be ready to contribute. They need to be ready to make an impact if they have to come off the bench. Jack Fletcher, I can confidently say, could have made an impact if he was called upon. So he deserves to make the bench. But yeah, good that Amorim did it, and he's clearly aware of it. And I really hope that record doesn't come to an end anytime soon, because it's something to be proud of in this modern era, definitely.
Definitely, and it is something that you imagine Ineos are quite keen to carry on with as well, because especially in an age...
Jack, I'm not sure. Surgeon Ratcliffe said the academy was crap in his interview the other week.
Well, there we go.
I should clarify. He said standards have slipped. I'll not misrepresent what he said.
Just put the lawyers on notice there.
Yeah.
But but in this day and age where it costs so much to sign players, particularly English players, it's so important to have that academy and that homegrown system, isn't it?
Yeah, but the academy is hugely improved, which is why those comments from Ratcliffe raised a few eyebrows. There was a bit of a lower period between maybe 2010 and before Nick Cox's arrival, where the youth teams were struggling a bit, and they weren't producing perhaps as many players as they would have liked. Nick Cox did an outstanding job as the head of the academy. a youth cup in 21-22, some excellent youth signings. We discussed this at the time when I think I did the podcast with David when he officially joined Everton that week to become their technical director. So Nick Cox was a big loss. Obviously, Stephen Torpey's come in from Brentford, but the club's got to continue to produce players. The reality is a lot of these players, the majority will not make the first team. Of course they won't, but I think what is excellent about United's academy over the years is people probably don't realise how many of these players then go into the football pyramid, whether that be the Championship, League One or League Two, and go on to have very successful careers. And obviously, success is subjective. I mean, if you're playing in the Championship for your career and having 300 professional appearances, that's definitely a success. It might not be United, it might not be Old Trafford, but if you go on and play for a League One club, that's definitely success as well. But obviously, United's priority is getting players to the first team. So that has to happen more. It has been happening. There's some talented young players within the academy system. And at the moment, I'd probably say there's around maybe 4 or 5 that have got a realistic chance of getting into the first team. So it'll be interesting to see this season because, of course, there's fewer fixtures, which makes it more difficult. It'll be interesting to see whether they get a chance at the end of the campaign, which things might have been wrapped up a little bit by then. Maybe United will have secured Champions League football and it's easier to give a youngster a chance. Maybe that'll come during the Christmas period when the Africa Cup of Nations happens. So we'll see. But it is obviously more difficult to give players these chances when United aren't in Europe and they crashed out the Carabao Cup second round very early.
Yeah, definitely. And just finally then, that's the season paused for the final time in 2025. We head into the November international break. Obviously, dread for all journalists covering Premier League and Championship teams. What would you make of the campaign? We're 11 games into the Premier League season. United, I believe, sit in 7th position. They are, 1 point outside the top 4. It's an interesting Premier League season. It feels a lot more competitive. The teams who've come up have done really well, particularly Sunderland. What do you think he'll make of it? I presume the mood is a lot better than it was going into October.
Yeah, I think you've just got to, again, tip your hat to Ruben Amorim for this turnaround because it seemed incredibly unlikely after Grimsby, after Manchester City, where they were in the table, the unwanted statistics that were racking up, Amorim's body language on the touchline, all the signs seem to be pointing towards Amorim losing his job. That conversation heightened after the Brentford game. That was a big setback. But October was fantastic. 3 wins on the bounce. Obviously, look, they would have liked to have started November with better results, but they didn't lose those games. And that's obviously a famous phrase, isn't it? If you can't win, don't lose. And United have showed a lot of spirit there in those 2 matches to secure a point both times on the road. So I think considering where they were at the start of the season and how bad it was, it's been very good in the last month and a half. United fans would have taken the start. If you look at it now on paper, the 7th in the league, as you've said, just a few points off 3rd and 2nd. So they're on 18 points. Chelsea are on 20. Manchester City are on 22. If United had won those games against Tottenham and Nottingham Forest, they'd be level with City on 22. They'd obviously be below in goal difference. But what a fantastic start to the season that would have been. You can then even go back earlier than that. If Fernandes had scored his penalty at Craven Cottage, they could be higher in the table as well. So it's actually been good. Amorim will be pleased. But as he said, there is more work to do, particularly with the defensive record that has to improve, as we discussed before. I think that's the key area now that has to be addressed because they're scoring goals. That was a huge problem last season. They couldn't score goals. They are now, but they're conceding too many. So they need to tighten up at the back. And if they do manage that without compromising their attacking threat, we could be looking at a very positive second half of the season, a very positive Christmas period. But the games will come thick and fast during the winter. And AFCON will have an impact. Ruben Amorim's discussed that again. And Burmo and Ahmad have been so important, especially in the last few weeks. And Burmo's 6 goals. And how is Amorim going to deal with those absences is going to be really interesting. Will United look to sign a new player in the January window? Perhaps with the Sesko injury. We'll see what happens with that. So there's a bit of uncertainty in that sense. And Amorim will have challenges on the horizon. But he's shown that he's got the tools to come up with solutions. Whereas I think even 6 weeks ago, we were questioning whether he did have those answers. But he's adapted. The team are playing differently. The centre halves are pushing up, they're tighter. The attack looks a bit more fluid. There's been little tweaks made in the team. Okay, he hasn't changed the formation. We spotted ourselves against Tottenham. Luke Shaw was pushing up, wasn't he, into midfield, and it was almost a back four at times. Then Shaw would drop back and make the three. So he clearly has done a lot of work, and it's been just brilliant to see that they've secured those 3 results in October and turned it around, because, as I say, at one point it looked really bleak for Amram. So fair play for that.
Definitely. And it's obvious now, though, isn't it, that what success is going to look like this season, it's not necessarily going to be finishing 7th, is it?
No, Champions League has to be the aim. Of course it does. And Europe was communicated to us at the start of the season as the target, but it has to be Champions League specifically. As I said, United need to be in the Champions League. They need, for the players want to be in that competition. There's better broadcast revenue, etc., etc. So there'll probably be 5 Champions League places this season. It seems very manageable, especially having obviously just 1 game a week. That'll eventually change in January, because United will begin their FA Cup campaign. But because they went out of the Carabao Cup so early and there's no European football, they need to be targeting a very good FA Cup run as well. They've got the quality to do it. They should be looking to at least get to the latter stages of that competition as well. Another trophy would be fantastic. That's what the club is all about, winning silverware. But yeah, Champions League and the Premier League has to be the target.
Definitely. Well, thanks for joining me, Steve. Obviously, it is the international break now, but I'm sure we'll be keeping across everything Manchester United on the Manchester Evening News website. So until we see you next time, take care and we'll catch you then.